We have more for your ears only. I'm Catherine Herzog.
I'm David Alpern with this quote from the news. They betrayed us at the first corner and continue to betray us. That was Sally Moore, an Irish-Egyptian protest leader, after a new coup in which a high court with backing from the ruling military council dissolved the newly elected Islamist-dominated parliament. It also ruled that ousted strongman Hosni Mubarak's last prime minister, Ahmed Shafiq, could remain in this weekend's presidential runoff against Mohammed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now this.
The notion that my White House would purposely release classified national security information is offensive.
The Plame case involved a person who was a United States attorney, the same thing that I have done here. That was the person who got that designation.
President Obama may find it offensive to have his White House accused of high-level leaking on national security matters, as so many administrations have in the past to buff their tough guy image. But his firm denial hardly put the matter to rest. Attorney General Eric Holder soon had to name 2 veteran federal prosecutors to investigate, reminding critics on Capitol Hill last week that the same sort of independent counsel probe produced the conviction of a top Bush White House aide for obstruction of justice after a leak that identified covert CIA operative Valerie Plame.
The leaks now involve Obama's hands-on control of deadly drone strikes and cyber attacks on the Iranian nuclear program, as well as of an al-Qaeda double agent who brought in a suicide device meant to destroy an airliner. Many details appear in the new book, Kill or Capture, The War on Terror and the Soul of the Obama Presidency, by Newsweek Daily Beast special correspondent Daniel Klaidman from Houghton, Mifflin, Harcourt. And for your ears only, Dan Klaidman joins us now. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, David. I appreciate it.
To begin, we must ask if you have been contacted for the new Justice Department leak investigation or reasonably expect you will be.
I have not been, and it's hard to know. From the stories that I've been reading in the paper, it's very hard to tell what the exact scope of this investigation is. I do know that these kinds of investigations, once they get started, particularly in a political environment, an election year, they have a way of expanding, and so I think it's a possibility, but I have not heard from them, and frankly hope I don't.
Your book itself gives an example of Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, then the Obama White House Chief of Staff, pushing the CIA to release terror war details for political purposes. Tell us about that episode.
Yeah, Rahm Emanuel was a enthusiastic fan of the drone program, and I think for a couple of reasons. I think, one, he had a hawkish side to him, and he simply thought it was a very effective program, and believed in it. But I think there was also an important political dimension to his enthusiasm for the program. Back in the summer of 2009, the CIA was avidly hunting for a top Taliban leader named Baitullah Masood, who had very close ties to al-Qaeda, and they had tried striking him many times, missed over and over again, and ultimately they got him. Now, Rahm Emanuel would check in on a regular basis with either Leon Panetta, the CIA director, who he was very close to, or Panetta's chief of staff, Jeremy Bash. Once they got Baitullah Masood in August, he was celebrating Emanuel, and he did push the CIA to put some of this out in the newspapers to celebrate these victories. I think he saw it as a way of insulating President Obama, who at the time was viewed by Republicans and criticized by Republicans as being soft on terrorism. If they could insulate him on that issue, then it would be easier to pursue the domestic agenda, which he was very concerned about.
Interestingly, you say liberal ideals on the indefinite detention of terror suspects actually led to more killings, which relates directly to the title of your book.
Well, that's right. I mean, this is a complicated story. When candidate Obama had made the promise to close Guantanamo, the question then arose, well, what do we do with the detainees there? What do we do with new detainees that we capture? He was opposed to bringing any new detainees to Guantanamo, and he was very uncomfortable with the idea of indefinite detention. Well, all of these legal problems surrounding detention in the minds of many of the people I interviewed in the administration, in the military, created kind of unintended consequences, and also a kind of created sort of perverse incentives to do more killing rather than capturing. Now, for the most part, to be fair, it's very difficult to capture terrorists when they're in places like Pakistan and Yemen and Somalia. But nevertheless, one close advisor to the president said to me, this was an issue that was always on our minds. We were always concerned about these kind of incentives that were being created because we didn't have a detention policy.
Obama and some other top aides drew a distinction between targeted killing of specific terrorists and so-called signature strikes. What's the difference, and what was the different way that Obama chose to deal with them?
Yeah, well, that's a very important point. Obama really learns about the difference between a so-called signature strike and a personality strike about 3 or 4 days into his presidency, after the very first drone strike in which they killed the wrong man. They killed a Pakistani tribal elder who was in favor of peace and much of his family. Turns out that was a signature strike. A signature strike is when you have a group of what the military calls military-aged males who you don't know their identity per se, but you know that they bear certain signatures or characteristics associated with terrorism. Say they visited a particular compound or were driving certain kinds of vehicles, and so you go after them even though you don't know exactly who they were. A personality strike is where you do have positive ID. Obama was learning about signature strikes for the first time after that first strike that had gone badly. He was very uncomfortable with it. He said, well, that's just not good enough for me. But ultimately, he was persuaded that it was a reasonable policy in Pakistan, at least the way the CIA was doing it. He held the line in terms of the military's program. They had their own targeted killing program. They wanted to do these signature strikes in places like Yemen and Somalia. For most of the first 3 years of his presidency, he said essentially no to the military. More recently, he's begun to relent.
Reviewers of your book find it obvious that your sources included top administration officials or sources close enough to say how they felt at key moments. Given the Rahm Emanuel precedent, did you sense there was a spoken or unspoken decision to cooperate with your project and a similar book by David Sanger of the New York Times?
Without getting into who my sources are, the one thing I will say is the White House did not give this to me, and I assume David Sanger as well, on a silver platter. We had to scrape and claw and scratch our way to get the information, and it's just not the way it works. This perception that, the White House has some kind of concerted campaign to try to build up the president's national security credentials and just sort of hand this stuff out. It didn't happen in my case. I think that just doesn't happen for the most part.
Newsweek Daily Beast special correspondent Daniel Klaidman's new book is Kill or Capture: The War on Terror and the Soul of the Obama Presidency from Houghton, Mifflin, Harcourt.
Quote from the news, a make-or-break moment for America's middle class. That was President Obama warning voters in November not to go back to Republican policies that caused the recession. Presumptive GOP presidential nominee Mitt Romney countered that rhetoric was no substitute for more economic recovery than the president has so far been able to deliver, and that hiring, quote, more firemen, more policemen, more teachers, unquote, was not the answer.
Next, the threat within military suicides.